Right now, as you are watching this, something big is happening under the surface of the Pacific Ocean. Water temperatures along the equator near South America are climbing fast, faster than scientists expected, faster than the computer models predicted just 3 months ago. And this warming is not some small blip on a chart. According to NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, the patch of ocean they watch most closely is already running more than 0.7 degrees Celsius above normal. That number is climbing every week. By late fall, forecasters say it could hit 3 to 4 degrees above average. If that happens, this will be the strongest El Niño event since humans started keeping records. You might be thinking, okay, warm water in the Pacific, why should I care? Because El Niño does not stay in the ocean. It reaches up into the sky. It grabs the jet stream, the river of fast-moving air that steers storms across North America, and it drags it south. It floods some states with rain. It bakes others with heat. It shuts down hurricanes in one ocean and fires them up in another. And when a really strong El Niño shows up, the entire weather map of the United States gets redrawn. The last time this happened at full strength was 1997. That event killed thousands of people around the world. It caused flooding in California that washed away highways. It triggered tornadoes across Florida. And over the next 5 years, it drained an estimated $5.7 trillion from the global economy. This one could be bigger. And El Niño is only one piece of the puzzle, because this time it is building on top of something that did not exist 30 years ago. A planet that is already running a fever, oceans that are already at record temperatures before El Niño even kicked in, a climate system that scientists say is now operating in territory we have never seen. So what exactly is coming for America over the next 12 months? That is what we are about to break down, region by region, season by season, starting with what is already happening right now. To understand why this matters, you first need to understand what El Niño actually is. And it is simpler than most people think. Picture the Pacific Ocean along the equator. It is a massive stretch of water thousands of miles wide, running from Indonesia all the way to the coast of Peru and Ecuador. In a normal year, strong winds called trade winds blow from east to west across this stretch. They push the warm surface water toward Asia and Australia. That leaves the water near South America cooler than usual. The cool water brings nutrients to the surface, fish thrive, and weather patterns stay in their normal groove. But every few years, those trade winds weaken. Sometimes they almost stop entirely. When that happens, all that warm water that was pushed west starts sloshing back east. It piles up near South America. The surface of the Pacific gets warmer, a lot warmer. That warming changes where storms form over the ocean. And because storm patterns over the Pacific control the jet stream shifts. In the United States, that shift means the storm track, the path that rain and snow systems follow across the country, moves south. Suddenly, states like California, Texas, Florida, and the Gulf Coast are in the firing line for storm after storm after storm. Meanwhile, the northern states, the upper Midwest, and the Pacific Northwest often see less snow, less cold, and an almost spring-like winter. This is El Niño in simple terms. Warm water moves, wind patterns change, and weather across half the planet gets rearranged. The cycle has been happening for thousands of years. It shows up every 2 to 7 years on average. Scientists track it by measuring ocean temperatures in a specific zone of the Pacific called the Niño 3.4 region. When that zone is more than half a degree Celsius above average for a few months straight, NOAA officially declares an El Niño event. On June 11, 2026, NOAA did exactly that. They upgraded from an El Niño watch to an El Niño Advisory. That means El Niño conditions are not just forecast anymore. They are here. The warm water is already building. The trade winds have already weakened. The atmosphere is already starting to respond. And the forecast says this is just the beginning. So, how strong is this El Niño going to get? That is the question every weather scientist in the world is trying to answer right now. And the numbers coming back from the computer models are, to put it bluntly, alarming. NOAA's Climate Prediction Center says there is an 81% chance that this El Niño reaches the very strong category between October and December. To put that in context, NOAA defines very strong as ocean temperatures in the Niño 3.4 region exceeding 2 degrees Celsius above average. That is the threshold only a handful of El Niño events have ever crossed. But the latest models suggest this one will not just cross that line, it will blow past it. A team at NOAA's Geophysical Fluid Dynamics Laboratory ran their SPEAR forecast model, which uses 30 different simulations of possible outcomes. All 30, every single one, projects a very strong El Niño peaking later this year. That kind of agreement across models is rare. Scientists describe it as a remarkably tight consensus. The European Center for Medium-Range Weather Forecasts, which is considered the gold standard for global weather prediction, backs this up. Their models show ocean temperatures in the key monitoring zone potentially reaching 3 to 4 degrees Celsius above average. If that holds, It would shatter the previous record set during the 1997 to 98 event. Yale Climate Connections pulled together projections from multiple climate models around the world. Their consensus estimate for the peak of this El Niño is about 3.6 degrees Celsius above average. That is not just a record. Climate scientist Zeke Housefather of Berkeley Earth called it a mind-blowing margin beyond anything we have observed before. NOAA's latest forecast, released on August 14, 2026, says there is a 69% chance this event will exceed the strength of every El Niño on record going back to 1950. The agency also puts the probability at 97% that El Niño conditions will persist through at least early spring of 2027. In plain terms, this is shaping up to be a monster, and it is not done growing. Now, here is where things get serious for anyone living in the United States. When you hear El Niño winter, you need to think of America being split in two. The southern half gets hammered with storms. The northern half gets an oddly mild, sometimes boring, sometimes drought-worsening winter. That is the textbook pattern. And for a very strong event like this one, those effects get dialed up significantly. Let us start with the region that historically gets hit the hardest during a Super El Niño, Southern California. Climate scientist Daniel Swain, who works with the California Institute for Water Resources, recently shared an update that got a lot of attention. He pointed to the European forecast model showing 70 to 100% odds of above-average winter rainfall across the Golden State. On top of that, the model gives 70 to 100% odds that this coming winter, December through February, will rank among the top 20% of wettest California winters ever recorded. That is not a minor uptick in rain. During past very strong El Niño winters, Southern California has seen rainfall totals 50 to 100% above average. Think about what that means for a region that just went through devastating wildfires. Burned hillsides do not absorb water. They shed it. That means mudslides, debris flows, and flash flooding become major risks the moment the first atmospheric river makes landfall. And atmospheric rivers are exactly what El Niño delivers to California. These are long plumes of moisture that stretch across the Pacific like a fire hose aimed at the coast. During the 1997 to 98 event, atmospheric rivers caused catastrophic flooding across Los Angeles and San Diego. Highways were washed out. Hillsides collapsed. Communities that had never flooded before found themselves underwater. The National Weather Service has already issued early guidance warning Southern California residents to prepare for a volatile winter ahead. In the words of one NWS forecaster, advanced monitoring and an improved understanding of El Niño patterns allow them to better predict and prepare the public, but the storms are still coming. The Central Sierra Nevada is expected to get buried in snow. That sounds like good news for the ski industry and for water supply, but heavy snow years come with their own problems. Avalanche risk goes up, mountain communities can get cut off, and when all that snow melts in the spring, rivers downstream can overflow their banks. Now move east from California across the southern tier of the United States. This is the other major impact zone. The Gulf Coast, from Texas through Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, and into Florida, faces an elevated risk of severe weather all winter long. NOAA's Climate Prediction Center says the highest chances of above-normal rainfall this winter are over the Gulf states and parts of the southeast stretching up into the mid-Atlantic. Mark Wiley, a duty officer with the National Weather Service, described the threat to Newsweek in direct terms. The risk of flash flooding and river flooding increases, along with the threat for severe weather, including a higher probability of tornadoes, with the highest risk area running across the deep south and the Gulf Coast into Florida. A strong El Niño, Wiley added, also raises the chance of winter precipitation across the southern United States, and if enough cold air is in place, that includes freezing rain. Tornadoes in winter might sound strange if you live in the north, but the Deep South regularly sees tornado outbreaks during El Niño winters. The southward displaced jet stream sends wave after wave of storm systems across the region, and when those systems clash with warm, moist Gulf air, the result can be explosive. Florida, in particular, gets a raw deal during strong El Niño years. More severe storms, more flooding, and an increased tornado threat that extends through the entire winter season. Now flip to the other half of the country. The northern United States, from the Pacific Northwest across the upper Midwest and into the Northeast, typically sees a very different El Niño winter. The polar jet stream, which normally dips south and brings cold air from Canada, stays pinned further north. That keeps the really bitter Arctic air locked up above the border. The result is a warmer than normal winter across the northern tier. The Pacific Northwest may see less snow at lower elevations. The upper Midwest and Great Lakes region could get less total snowfall than a typical winter. Parts of the Ohio Valley and mid-Mississippi River Valley are forecast to stay drier than normal, which could actually make existing drought conditions worse. But here's the wild card, and this is the part that makes even seasoned meteorologists nervous: the polar vortex. If you have been paying attention to winter weather in the last few years, you have probably heard the term polar vortex thrown around. But it is more than just a buzzword. It is a real atmospheric structure that sits high above the North Pole, spinning like a giant top. When the polar vortex is strong, it acts like a wall. It keeps the coldest air trapped up in the Arctic where it belongs. But when the polar vortex weakens or collapses, that wall breaks down. Cold air spills out of the Arctic and pours south into the United States, sometimes reaching as far as Texas and Florida. And here's the thing about El Niño winters. They have a track record of disrupting the polar vortex. Scientists have found that strong El Niño events increase the chances of something called a sudden stratospheric warming event. This is exactly what it sounds like. The air high above the Arctic, in a layer of the atmosphere called the stratosphere, warms suddenly and dramatically. The warming weakens the polar vortex from above. As the disruption works its way down to the lower atmosphere, the jet stream gets bent out of shape. Arctic air finds a path south. Research from Severe Weather Europe shows that El Niño winters have a higher frequency of these polar vortex disruption events, particularly in December and January. If the 2026 to 27 winter follows this pattern, the northern United States could see periods of extreme cold and heavy snow, even in the middle of an otherwise mild winter. Think of it like this. The El Niño pattern sets up a generally warm winter for the north. But the polar vortex is like a trap door in the Arctic floor. If it opens, even briefly, freezing air floods south. And the contrast between that Arctic blast and the unusually warm air already in place can create explosive winter storms. The Northeast has the most uncertain outlook of any region. A strong subtropical jet can support powerful coastal storms, called nor'easters. But whether those storms bring rain, snow, or a brutal corridor of ice depends entirely on the position of the cold air. A small shift in the storm track could mean the difference between a minor rain event and a major blizzard. So the bottom line for the northern states is this. Expect a generally mild winter, but do not let your guard down, because when El Niño and the polar vortex interact, the weather can turn dangerous in a hurry. While all of this is playing out over the United States, El Niño is doing something else that gets far less attention. It is suppressing hurricanes in the Atlantic Ocean. That might sound like a silver lining, and in some ways, it is. El Niño creates what meteorologists call wind shear over the Atlantic. Wind shear is basically a change in wind speed or direction at different levels of the atmosphere. When a hurricane tries to form, wind shear tears it apart. It tips the storm sideways, rips the top off, and prevents it from organizing into anything dangerous. This is exactly what is happening right now during the 2026 Atlantic hurricane season. NOAA's updated August forecast calls for 7 to 13 named storms, 2 to 6 hurricanes, and 0 to 2 major hurricanes. That is well below the long-term average of 14 named storms and 7 hurricanes in a typical season. Colorado State University's August outlook lines up with those numbers. They project 9 named storms, 4 hurricanes, and just 1 major hurricane this year. 2 storms have already formed this season, tropical storms Arthur and Bertha. Both developed in the Gulf of Mexico, and that detail matters. Because while a Super El Niño effectively shuts down hurricane formation in the open Atlantic, it cannot stop what forecasters call homegrown tropical systems. These are storms that develop close to the United States, in the Gulf of Mexico, or just off the southeast coast. They form in warm, shallow waters that El Niño's wind shear cannot fully reach. During Tropical Storm Bertha in late July, something unusual happened. Southern Louisiana was placed under both a tropical storm warning and an extreme heat warning at the same time. That had not happened since 2005. The heat index in Lake Charles hit 121 degrees Fahrenheit. Think about that for a second. A tropical storm in extreme heat, happening in the same place on the same day. That is what weather in a warming world looks like. The old rules do not fully apply anymore. And that brings us to the part of this story that goes beyond El Niño. Because El Niño, as big as it is only one layer on top of something much larger. The planet is running hotter than it has ever been in recorded history. Before El Niño even started forming this year, the world's oceans were already at record temperatures. About 82% of the global ocean surface was experiencing marine heat waves this year, according to Europe's Copernicus Climate Service. That is not a typo. More than 4 out of every 5 patches of ocean on Earth were running a fever. This matters because El Niño does not create heat from nothing. It takes existing warmth from the Pacific Ocean and releases it into the atmosphere. So when El Niño arrives on top of an ocean that is already the hottest it has ever been, the resulting temperature spike is amplified. James Hansen, the former NASA climate scientist who first warned Congress about global warming back in 1988, has projected that global temperatures will reach about 1.7 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels in 2027. That would be a new record by a large margin. Berkeley Earth, a nonprofit research group, has been tracking this in real time. Their chief scientist, Robert Rode, recently said something that deserves your attention. He said, "We are likely to see something quite dramatic in the next year or so. It will be giving us weather conditions that we would normally expect to be a decade or more away. It is going to be a big deal." In July 2026, the odds of this year becoming the hottest year on record jumped from 12% to 69% in just 1 month. That is how fast the El Niño heat is building. July itself was brutal for the United States. A heat dome over the eastern half of the country pushed temperatures into record territory. Atlantic City, New Jersey hit 106 degrees Fahrenheit on July 4th during the FIFA World Cup. Salt Lake City recorded 109 degrees, its highest temperature ever. Rapid City, South Dakota, hit an all-time record of 112 degrees on July 26th. As of early August, at least 70 deaths have been linked to the summer heat waves. And, according to multiple climate scientists, this summer is not even the peak. The real temperature surge from El Niño typically hits with a 3-month delay after ocean warming peaks. So, if the Pacific hits its maximum warmth in November or December of 2026, the biggest global temperature impact lands in early 2027. That is when the records are most likely to fall. The World Meteorological Organization says there is more than an 80% chance that 2027 will become the warmest year in human history. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres put it in terms that are hard to ignore. He said, El Niño is not just on our doorstep. It is inside the house and turning up the heat. And this is only a warm-up act. El Niño is strengthening, adding fuel to a planet already on fire with scorching heat domes, wildfires, and record-hot seas. Beyond the heat, the economic cost of a Super El Niño is something most people do not think about until it hits their wallet. A study published in the journal Science looked at the financial damage from past strong El Niño events. The researchers at Dartmouth College found that the 1982 to 83 El Niño caused an estimated $4.1 trillion in global economic losses over the following 5 years. The 1997 to 98 event was even worse, at $5.7 trillion. The 2015 to 16 event cost about $3.9 trillion. Those numbers are not just about storm damage. They include lost agricultural output from droughts and floods, disrupted supply chains, higher food prices, reduced fisheries, and damage to infrastructure that takes years to repair. Now consider that the 2026 to 27 El Niño could be stronger than all of those. The food system is already feeling it. The Asia-Pacific region, which grows a massive share of the world's rice, sugar, palm oil, and coffee, is looking at drier conditions and potential crop failures. Indonesia and Malaysia are watching their palm oil plantations carefully. India's monsoon got off to a late start this year, raising concerns about rice production. Australia, which normally exports large amounts of wheat, faces drought conditions across its eastern farming regions. For Americans, the ripple effects show up at the grocery store. Coffee prices, which are already near record highs, could climb further if Brazilian and Vietnamese harvests get hit. Wheat prices could spike if Australian exports fall short. Sugar, which is used in thousands of products, faces supply pressure from disrupted harvests in Thailand and India. Fitch, the credit rating agency, published an analysis warning that sustained food shortages from El Niño could push inflation higher globally, even in wealthy countries that normally absorb these shocks without much trouble. Then there is the cost of disaster response. If Southern California floods the way it did in 97 to 98, the repair bill will be in the billions. If the Gulf Coast takes multiple severe weather outbreaks this winter, insurance claims will pile up. If the Polar Vortex collapses and sends an Arctic blast into the Northeast, power grids that are already stretched will face enormous stress. The Dartmouth researchers who studied past El Niño costs estimated that over the rest of this century, increased El Niño activity driven by climate change could cost the global economy an additional $33 trillion. That is not a worst-case scenario. That is the median projection. And there is one more thing to watch after the El Niño itself ends. Because history shows that what comes after a strong El Niño can be just as dangerous. About 60% of strong El Niño events are followed within 12 months by a La Niña, the cold phase of the cycle. If that happens, late 2027 could see a rapid flip. The Pacific cools, the jet stream shifts back north, and suddenly the Atlantic hurricane season roars back to life. The 1997 to 98 El Niño was followed by a brutal La Niña in 1998 to 99. That La Niña helped fuel Hurricane Mitch, which killed more than 11,000 people in Central America. It also contributed to catastrophic flooding along the Yangtze River in China. Nobody knows for sure whether this El Niño will be followed by a La Niña, but the historical pattern suggests it is more likely than not. The World Food Program has already flagged the coming months as a critical window. They say this El Niño is unfolding at a time when food systems are already under strain from high energy prices, fertilizer costs, and geopolitical tensions. For developing countries that depend on agriculture and fishing, the next 12 to 18 months could push millions more people into hunger. For the United States specifically, the post-El Niño period is when wildfire risk often spikes in the West. All the extra rain that El Niño delivers to California feeds vegetation growth. Grasses and shrubs explode with new life. But when La Niña brings dry conditions back, All that new growth turns into fuel. The same rain that filled reservoirs and ended drought one year becomes the brush that feeds fires the next. It is a cycle, and it is accelerating. So where does all of this leave us? Right now, in August of 2026, we are sitting at a turning point. The Pacific Ocean is warming at an extraordinary rate. El Niño is officially underway and gaining strength every week. The world's top climate agencies agree that this event will likely be one for the history books. For Americans, the practical reality breaks down like this. If you live in Southern California, the Southwest, or anywhere along the Gulf Coast from Texas to Florida, prepare for a wetter, stormier winter than you have seen in years. Stock emergency supplies. Know your flood zones. Do not ignore evacuation orders. If you live near burn scars from recent wildfires, the mudslide risk is real and deadly. If you live in the northern tier of the country, from the Pacific Northwest through the upper Midwest to New England, expect a generally mild winter with lower snowfall. But stay alert for sudden cold snaps if the polar vortex breaks down. Those events can bring dangerous wind chills and paralyze cities that were not expecting Arctic conditions. If you care about food prices and your grocery bill, understand that the supply chains for coffee, wheat, rice, sugar, and cooking oils are all exposed to El Niño disruption. Prices may rise. Shortages are possible in some categories. And if you care about the bigger picture, understand this. The 2026 to 27 El Niño is not just a weather event. It is a preview. Scientists have been warning for years that climate change would make these natural cycles more extreme. The ocean would store more heat. The atmosphere would hold more moisture. The swings between wet and dry, hot and cold, calm and catastrophic would get wider. That is exactly what we are seeing now. Robert Rode of Berkeley Earth said it clearly. We are getting weather conditions that we would normally expect to be a decade or more away. The future showed up early, and it brought El Niño with it. Climate scientist Zeke Housefather of Berkeley Earth described the forecast models for this El Niño as mind-numbing. Researchers at Nature published findings confirming that the median forecast from 14 top climate models projects this event will exceed the 1997 record by a wide margin. The window to prepare is now, not when the first atmospheric river makes landfall in Los Angeles, not when the first tornado outbreak tears through Mississippi, not when the grocery bill jumps by 30% in the spring. Right now. Because what is building in the Pacific Ocean is not a drill. It is not a hypothetical. The warm water is there. The atmosphere is responding. The jet stream is already shifting. And the next 12 months of American weather are about to be rewritten by the biggest El Niño any of us have ever seen. And the hard part? El Niño is only the beginning. If this video helped you understand what is coming, share it with someone who needs to see it. And stay tuned, because we will be tracking this event all the way through the winter with updates as the forecasts change.